It seems crazy to be talking about the 2025 Formula One season already, when we haven't even got to pre-season testing for 2024. However, with Lewis Hamilton announcing that he'll be driving for the Scuderia in 2025, everybody's asking why. Is it that he saw the simulator data for the W15E and thought, nope, it's just not going to get me that 8th title? Is it because Daimler stepped in and said, nope, there is no way that we're going to give him $80 or $100 million per year, not when we could be spending that money on R&D to try and make the W15E and what follows it in 2025, let alone when the new regulations come in 2026? Or is it more fundamental than that? Is it that Hamilton no longer trusts Mercedes to be able to put together a championship-winning car, let alone a championship-winning season? And it's there, in that word trust, that I think we will find our answer. But not that Hamilton doesn't trust Mercedes, rather that Hamilton feels Mercedes no longer trusts him. From his very earliest days as a youngster, before that 8-year-old who was so precocious that he could walk up to Ron Dennis and say, one day I'm going to race for McLaren, Hamilton was enveloped in a circle of trust. Anthony Hamilton backed him 100%. We've all heard the stories of the multiple jobs he held down just to make sure that Lewis could go go-karting. After that, once Lewis demonstrated his ability on the track, Ron Dennis had that same faith, that same trust in him, giving him his drive in McLaren. In 2007, when he broke onto the scene, Ron even backed him against world champion Fernando Alonso by refusing to enforce team orders to make Hamilton Alonso's number 2. And we all know how that turned out. Whilst Alonso would leave, that faith, that trust, that confidence in Hamilton's abilities would see them forge a partnership that would see Hamilton go on to become Formula One Drivers' World Champion in 2008. Making it the first time that McLaren had a Drivers' World Champion since Mika Hakkinen in 1999. But all good things must come to an end, and McLaren would start to lose their way, unable to provide Hamilton with a car that would allow him to fight for a second World Championship. And it was at this moment that Niki Lauda would come knocking, telling Hamilton that if he came to Mercedes, they would build a car around him. They would provide him with a car that would allow him to not only win a world championship again, but go on to become one of the most successful drivers in Formula One history ever. And it was at that moment Hamilton took that leap of faith. He trusted Lauda, he believed in him, because Lauda believed in Hamilton in much the same way Ron Dennis had believed in Hamilton, in the same way Anthony Hamilton had always believed in Hamilton. And Hamilton, like any elite athlete, anyone at the top of their game, needs around them a coterie of people, an entourage who believe in them. That positive reinforcement, not someone to boost their ego, but a nice, comfortable space in which they can operate so that they can excel at what they do best. Like the greats that came before him, Michael Schumacher, Ayrton Senna, Niki Lauda himself. What Schumacher brought to the Brackley concern was a driver so consummately talented that when he said the car needed to be changed because it was doing X, the team listened. No questions, no doubt, just faith, trust that that driver feedback was fact. If the car is understeering or oversteering, or there's a hesitation on throttle pickup, and a Schumacher or a Senna or a Lauda told their engineer, the engineer would pass that information back because it was taken as written, it was taken as read, so the changes were done. And in 2014 and 2015, that is exactly what Mercedes did. When Hamilton gave them feedback on the car, they introduced the changes, and it took them to back-to-back drivers' world championships. And it is here, 2016, where I firmly believe the first cracks appeared in that trust. The circle was broken, and it's here where I believe we can look back and get our answers as to why now, in 2024, Lewis Hamilton is announcing that he will be driving for Ferrari in 2025. On the other side of the garage, Nico Rosberg was at his wit's end, frustrated, an absolute ball of tension that Hamilton had become Drivers' World Champion in 2014 and 2015, when he believed he should have been given just as much opportunity to take the crown. Rosberg was fast, Rosberg was ruthless as a driver, but Hamilton had his mettle. But to try and balance it, to try and have that harmonious sense in the garage, Toto Wolff made an absolute error. Instead of just leaving Rosberg to up his game, to beat Hamilton on track, and when I say Hamilton, it's not just the driver, but it was the team around him. They made the best pit stops, they made the best strategy calls, they executed in practice, qualifying and the race. That was why Hamilton was a triple world champion. For some reason or other, Rosberg would make mistakes, Rosberg would crack, his team would crack. If there was going to be a pit stop that was slow, it was Rosberg's. If there was going to be a car that had a mechanical failure, it was Rosberg's. So Toto Wolff swapped them. Lewis's garage and the mechanics and engineers that came with it would be given to Rosberg, and Rosberg's to Hamilton, and the impact was nigh on immediate. All of a sudden, it was Hamilton having DNFs. All of a sudden, it was Hamilton having shaky pit stops. All of a sudden, Rosberg had a finely tuned machine when it came to turning up at the track and executing in practice, qualifying and race. But that isn't where it stopped. Throughout his career, Hamilton has always excelled on the brakes. He can immediately get a sense of the threshold and take the car into the braking zone, balance it acutely and exit with the highest apex speed possible. And it was in this area of the car that Mercedes made yet another change to favour Rosberg. Well, that's what Team Lewis Hamilton would have you believe. Hamilton, again, remember, braking is his forte, loves Brembo brakes. He loves the feel that they gave him. And so it was intuitive to him. And a component on the car he would never have recommended that Mercedes change. However, Rosberg preferred carbon industry brakes. So what did Mercedes do? They changed to carbon industry. To Hamilton, it must have seemed as though that circle of trust, that faith that had been built around him at Mercedes was shattering. Whilst objectively you could say all that Mercedes were doing were trying to give both drivers parity, both drivers an opportunity to win. You could even argue that Hamilton, having had Brembo brakes to benefit from in 2014 and 15, taking him to 2 Drivers' World Championships, had perhaps had the favour. But that's looking at it rationally, objectively, and Formula One is a cauldron of emotions. What would follow is that at the end of the season in 2016, Hamilton would feel that Mercedes reneged on a promise. Both drivers had been told that if the drivers were still fighting for the championship, but the Constructors' Championship had been wrapped up, they were free to engage, they were free to fight it out, the team would not intervene. However, in the season-ending race at Abu Dhabi, when Hamilton attempted to back Rosberg up into the chasing pack, hoping that they would attack him and take points off Rosberg, team orders came over the radio, ordering Hamilton to extend the gap, to give Rosberg breathing space, to allow him to stay ahead. Hamilton would forlornly come on the radio to say, "I thought you said you would stay out of it." Following on from the collision between Hamilton and Rosberg at the Spanish Grand Prix in Barcelona, where a potential 1-2 for Mercedes became a double DNF, Hamilton, who in his opinion believed the team should have admonished Rosberg for closing the gap on him, was now again seeing or feeling that the team was favouring Rosberg. That circle of trust and faith in him to lead them to titles was vanishing. Rosberg would then become world champion in 2016 and immediately retire from the sport. Everything that Mercedes, that Toto, that Lauda had done to give Rosberg parity was thrown back in their faces. Instead of a carefully crafted, some would say manipulated position where they would have two world champions lining up on the grid in 2017, they would have no active world drivers champion driving their car. It echoed the same clumsiness that Williams managed to do in 1993. Having Nigel Mansell dominantly win the title in 92, they signed Alain Prost. Alain Prost came with a clause in his contract saying that Mansell couldn't be in the other seat. So Mansell left. So Williams didn't have the number one on their car in 1993. It beggared belief when they did it again by signing Heinz-Harold in 1995, only to see Hill win the title in 96, leaving again, and them not having the number one on the car in 1997. However, back to Mercedes. Mercedes went into full-on PR crisis management. They couldn't put out enough content saying how much they loved Hamilton, how much they backed Hamilton, how much the team was behind Hamilton, how much he was their future and was going to forge new glorious feats of success with the team. And to be fair, he did, going on to become Drivers' World Champion again and again and again. The partnership between him and Bottas, a de facto number 2, not because it was in the contract, worked. So what did Mercedes do? Rightly, they had to look out for the future. Hamilton would leave at some point. So instead of keeping Bottas on, which Hamilton pleaded with them to do, they signed George Russell, an eye on the future. Chink. The trust was broken again. Over the subsequent 2 seasons, they would then fail to listen to Hamilton when he would say, "Do not develop the car down this path. We're going in the wrong direction." And that's not the zero side pods. That's more fundamentally the center of gravity. They took it out of Hamilton's comfort zone. Some would say to favor Russell. Some would just say the technical team believed they knew what they were doing and didn't need Hamilton's advice. And it must have been at this moment, let alone when Mercedes would then offer him a 1-year contract with an option for a 2nd year, rather than the 2, 3 or 4-year contract that he wanted to finish his career, where Hamilton must have realised it was time to move on. It was time to climb out of a Mercedes and into the scarlet red colours of Ferrari and Maranello.